Welcome to another episode of Coaching Uncaged. Today I am talking with Lucy Gourlay, a time to think coach. Lucy, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Robert. It's lovely of you to have me here. So thank you.
So you're a time to think coach. And for people that don't know much about time to think, could you tell me a little bit about what it is?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So it's a great question because time to think really is essentially that, giving people time to think. And that's what I do as a time to think coach. And it's something I've always been really passionate about giving people that space to either have a brain dump or just clear their mind. But the key thing is with the promise of no interruption, because when you know that you're not going to be interrupted, it's very different than to get lucky and not be interrupted. And so I've always enjoyed that process of giving people that space and just letting them let their mind go wherever it needs to go. So essentially, that's really what a time to think coach is.
So you give a promise of no interruption. Mm-hmm. So how does that come into the coaching conversation? Is that part of I'm assuming it's part of the contract?
Mm-hmm. It is. So as a time to think coach, I am also a transformational life coach. So when people get in touch with me, it depends on what their need is and whether they feel that they want a more challenging session or whether they just want that space. So beforehand, I share with them some information that I'm going to invite them to think about whatever they want to think about. And I will say to them, and please know that I won't interrupt you until you want something from me. And people sometimes can feel slightly uncomfortable about that. But when they're given that space, and I don't say anything, they then find that actually their mind just keeps going. And when they feel done, they will say to me, "Can I have a question?" But until that point, I can't assume they finish thinking, because even if they're silent, their mind won't be. And I have to really be sure. So it's so important I don't step in with my thoughts or my suggestions. So until they give me permission, and then they will tell me and they'll say, "Can I have a question, please?" And then I will ask them again, what more do they think and feel or want to say? And then they hear that question differently as well, which is also so fascinating, why I love it so much.
So you're asking the same question each time you place the question into the space?
More or less. What you do is you slightly alter how you say it. So you may say, "What more do you think or feel?" And you slightly have the intonation on the word feel. And then the next time you may say, "What more do you think or feel or would like to say?" And eventually somebody will say they're done, and then you'll know that they're done because they say, "No, that really is it." So it depends on how long the session is and what the outcome is. They then say to the person, "Is there anything you'd like to achieve or get out of our time that we have available?" And then they may say something. So we may revisit what they've gone over, or they may have some assumptions that they want to just work on. But essentially, I have been known to do many sessions where I've only asked 2 questions, and it has been such a powerful experience. And I've only asked 2 questions. Yeah.
So that's really interesting, because often in coaching and coach training and books that I read about coaching, they talk about these catalytic questions, these powerful questions. And there's even a book called "And the Next Question Is," that's just full of questions. And I know especially new coaches can be really sort of caught in this thought process that they have to come up with these amazing questions all the time. And sometimes that can sort of cloud their thinking or get in the way of what they're doing, because they're just in this "what's my next question" phase. But I guess you're in because you know what your next question is, you're able to really get into that non-interrupting mode, but also that listening space.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it's really interesting you say that, Robert, because I have that very book. And when I was doing my Animas training, and I was really using that opportunity to learn as many sort of tools to my coaching, I was very much like that, thinking, what's the next question? And I found myself quickly opening that book, flicking through, thinking, am I armed with lots of powerful questions? And it's a brilliant book, and it's great to have those questions. But the more I work as a time to think coach, the more I have the courage to trust that that person I'm working with can actually work it out for themselves. And it's confirmed for me over again. So it does absolutely take the pressure off from trying to think of a clever question or a powerful question, because actually it's a really powerful question. Just asking somebody, what would they like to think about? Because actually people aren't often asked that question. You may start off with an invitational question that has a bit more meaning, but just simply, what would you like to think about? And so it does absolutely take the pressure off. And not everyone likes that either. And so sometimes clients will come back and say, well, they'll ask me my opinion. So instead of trying to think of a clever question, I'll just come back to them, well, what do you think? And I put it back to them. But the minute I come back to them and say, what do they think? They hear it differently again. And then they then go on again. So yeah, it does definitely take that pressure off clever questions.
And I guess it also really embraces this idea that the client can find their own way through. And it's not about the coach sort of leading them through, but actually it's about the coach providing a space where they can find that way through.
Mm-hmm. It is absolutely. And it does again come back to me as the coach having the courage to trust that that person in front of me is intelligent enough and knows their mind enough to work it out. But there's no doubt about it, there will be things that may block them or stop them. They may not be in the right space. There may be something missing, some information or emotions. And maybe then there is time for a different type of question. But the more I see people given that right space, and I mean the generative attention, really focusing, and for me to remove all judgment and just be there. Honestly, I love it. That I do get so passionate about it. I get very excited by it because I watch people transform before my very eyes. And people do, and people can sit and talk for an hour, and I've asked the question twice, and then they thank me because they think I've changed their lives and I've done nothing. That's not strictly true, obviously. I haven't. I've been there and supported them, but it confirms to me as well how often people aren't really listened to. And that's not just in the coaching world, that's in life generally. And I'm guilty of it myself with my own children. They come and ask me something, and if I don't have the time, I end up spending more time fanning around, whereas I could just give them 10 minutes, listen to them, and then they've gone off and sorted it out themselves. But we're all a bit guilty of that, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And I think there's something really interesting there about, when we have the time. So it's not just about creating the time to think for the coachee, but it's also giving ourselves that time in that space as well, because we might be rushing in our coaching, which stops us from doing that, as you said, generative attention.
Mm-hmm. And you're absolutely right. And if somebody does want to talk to me in any situation and I don't have the time where I know I can give them that 100% attention, I will say to them, I really want to listen to you, but now is not the right time. Can we find some time? Because if there's any distraction, then I won't be listening properly, but that person will know that as well. You can always tell when someone's not really listening to you. Even a glance at your watch or a quick check of the time or body language, you can tell straight away when someone's not listening to you. And if I feel I can't give that 100% attention, then it's important I say that to somebody, because I will be doing them a disservice otherwise.
And as you say that, it makes me think about other environments like leadership and meeting environments, because I notice sometimes in a meeting that people are a bit distracted. Sometimes they're thinking about what's coming next, or when is it their turn, or whatever that might be, and they're not giving the person speaking their full attention. And we all notice this, and we pick this up, and it's interesting how that will have its own impact in the space when we don't feel fully listened to.
Mm-hmm. And you're absolutely right. And a thinking environment in the workplace and in meetings is so powerful, because if everybody knows they are going to get a turn to speak, it will stop their temptation to interrupt. and they will then be able to listen because they know they're going to get a turn to speak. And you often find in a group session there's somebody who likes the sound of their own voice, so you know that they're going to talk longer. So you could set it up by saying, look, we've all got 5 minutes each, and everyone then knows, and then everyone feels valued as well. So you find people do listen, and you know that you've got your own time to speak as well. So it's really powerful in the workplace. Well, it's powerful in life, full stop. Yeah, you can tell I'm passionate about it.
I can indeed, and I think it's great to really recognize how something that we might use in a coaching space can also exist outside of that space, and how it can that quality of attention can really allow somebody to feel valued. But I can also imagine that at times it can make people feel vulnerable, especially if they're not sure of their own thinking, or if they think that perhaps their thinking won't be valued, or it's not good enough, in inverted commas.
But I think as well, it's being mindful of what's referred to as the 10 components, which are the part of the thinking environment. It's sort of the cluster of things that have been noticed to create people's best thinking. And so being mindful of appreciating that person, and equality, so making that person feel equal time, equal in the hierarchy, and difference, and being aware of differences and appreciating those differences. And if somebody feels very valued, and that you're coming from a completely non-judgmental, unconditional approach, then people will feel safe, and that they will feel that whatever comes out of their mouth is absolutely fine. Because you're absolutely right, if people feel they're going to say something that maybe sounds silly, if they're supported, their next thing that comes out of their mouths might be their brilliant idea. And so it's again recognizing that if whatever comes out, if they feel valued enough, their next best idea will probably then come out. So but it comes back to just creating that space for people.
Yeah, and I often think that coaches are very good at creating that right space. And I'm just wondering, people that are listening or watching and think about, well, I create an unconditional space and I have no judgment in my space. What would you say is different for a time to think coach than a normal coach? If that question makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. And I think, to be really honest about it, Robert, it's just the awareness of it, because there's no doubt about it. I'm not perfect. I like to think I am. No, I don't, obviously. But I can be judgmental. I can have a desire to interrupt. And I sometimes think my advice is going to be the best advice. But the difference is I'm very, very aware of that, and that impact, and what that might do to the person that I'm listening to. So I hold it all in. I park it. I come into that space having parked all that. Whereas if you're not really embodying the 10 components, there is that risk that you want to perhaps come forward with a question or something. But I mean, don't get me wrong, I do have those times, and then I keep quiet. And at the end of the session, I'm so grateful I kept my mouth shut, because I knew that if I had asked that question, it would have gone in the wrong direction. And invariably, people ask themselves the questions I think I want to ask them anyway. So, and they really do. So I think as a time to think coach, you really, you understand the 10 components. You have such a deep dive into the whole process. So you just have a deeper awareness of it. But as I said, there are moments where you can, and I want to suggest things and do things, but I do hold it in. So I think that's perhaps the difference. It's just that awareness and having taken it to a deeper level.
And you've mentioned the 10 components there a few times. I just wonder if you could maybe just give us a sort of a high chunk view of what they are.
Sure. So having the 10 components in place is, again, going to help somebody with their best independent thinking. And they are attention, equality, feelings, information, encouragement, ease, incisive questions, appreciation, difference, and place. And all of those are really going to just help set that ideal thinking environment. And feelings, being aware of somebody's feelings, information, recognizing whether that person has all the information, ease, are they comfortable, do they feel safe, and are they physically comfortable as well? Place, have they made the time for themselves? Are they going to be interrupted, or can they really enjoy that time for themselves? Attention, of course, is the most critical, that they know that they're going to get my attention. And appreciation, to make sure they feel valued. And if they feel appreciated and valued, again, that puts people in a really good place to be able to be able to encourage their independent thinking.
It's really interesting. As you were talking about those 10 components, you said place. It reminded me of placement that you might use with clean language, just to ask, where does that sit? Is it internal, external? Where might you place that? And it's really interesting how I sort of was like, I love it when different processes have those moments of crossover and blend to them. And I'm wondering, how do you go about blending time to think work with your transformational coaching work?
That's a very good question, Robert. Well, again, I think it depends on the need for the individual client. And I work with some people that come and say, I want to work on my business and my plans, and they need a structure and they want to be held accountable. And so a thinking environment works to a point, because they'll get to a point, but then they want me to hold them accountable. So we'll go through things. And so all of the 10 components for me are always in place, and it's something I try and embody at all times. But in terms of the difference for clients and their needs and what they want, it's very bespoke to each individual. But I think more and more I do more time to think coaching, and I think that's more what I'm more known for, is being able to hold that space for people. But equally, I have a few people I work with, and we do sort of accountability check-ins, and it's much more goal focused, and I then have to come up with clever questions.
I'm sure they are there at the tip of your tongue anyway. And as you say that, there is this thing. So as I was talking, they were asking that question, I sort of thought, am I sort of going, there's this coaching and then there's that coaching, and we're doing one or the other, or we have to blend them? And as you were answering and saying that, time to think is at the forefront of your mind in whatever coaching you're doing, it sort of made me go, that's, I guess, how I see narrative coaching as well, that it's always part of the coaching, regardless of what coaching is actually happening. And it kind of feeds the way that I work. And so sometimes I'll slip into more narrative ways of working than other times, but it's always kind of hovering there for me, whether we're deep in narrative or on the surface of narrative.
And I think, ultimately, as coaches, we all want the best for our client. We all want the best for the person sitting in front of us. And I think that's where it's great. I'm so grateful I did my Animas journey, because I feel I've got some great skills and great different ways of coaching and different things I can bring in. So ultimately, we all want the best for that client or the person sitting in front of us. And I think as well, the time to think, as coaches, we all essentially give people that space, and it's just how we use it. And so it's a blend of all of that. I would agree. And I think narrative coaching is another great style of coaching. But if you look at every coach, we all do bits of all sorts of blend from all sorts of levels. And I think with experience as well, we can all build on that, which is what I love as well. I love being able to build on that. Yeah.
And I think you're right there, that with experience, we blend more, or perhaps we blend less. We start to strip stuff away. I know that when I first started coaching, there was lots of stuff happening in the session, and lots of note taking, and lots of me kind of pulling thoughts together. And over time, I do a lot less of that, a lot less note taking, if any at all, in a session, and a lot more of me doing stuff and allowing things to emerge into the space and to be pondered and explored and taking time with, as opposed to trying to get somewhere.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. And I think when you first start your coaching journey, you're very much led by your head. And I think with time, you're led by your heart and your instinct. And I'm very much led by my heart, what feels right. And absolutely, I feel I can really relax into that and trust that I know where it's going to go, or that I'm going to come up with the right question, which inevitably is going to be, what more do you think and feel? So
and I love that feels like a different question as you ask it multiple times. It sort of reminds me of, as I've said, some of that clean language stuff where it's pretty much the same question. Yes, there are nuances and shifts as the coaching goes on, but there's the same style of question that's being explored. It's just allowing you to kind of delve a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper each time you hear that question.
Mm-hmm. And I remember learning this from one of my huge collection of coaching books that I felt I had to buy, every single one that everyone would recommended. But I think it was Rich Litvin who always says, you can just ask, what else? What else? What else? And you can just say the same question and go so deeply with that. And sometimes it's the simplicity of that. And people do hear it differently. When you say it, you think you're just repeating yourself and it's perhaps a bit dull. But when you're listening to it, you do absolutely hear it differently. And I find that the simplicity of it really powerful.
And I think one of the things that comes with time as well is that we might ask the same question, but there is a different intention with that question. And I think sometimes that's part of what's felt in the space between coach and coachees is the intention to go deeper, or the permission to go deeper and explore what else sits in the space or in the thinking or the emotions for the client.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah.
I remember talking to, I can't remember who it was now actually, but I remember them being like, they didn't like that what else question, and them saying, it's coaches being lazy. I remember saying, or thinking, maybe I didn't say it at the time, but I remember thinking, well, sometimes there is a falseness about asking the what else question, or is there anything more question, because we've been told to ask that question. So as the coach, we're just asking because somebody's told us to, as opposed to a real curiosity and a desire to know what else is going on there, and sort of teasing that into the space.
I completely agree, because I think quite often as coaches, you can be in an environment where you get a sense that they're holding back, that the client is holding back perhaps, and you're trying to create that space by saying what else or what more, because you feel that they're holding back. And that's what I love so much about it, that simplicity. And if they don't want to go there, then they'll tell you, and that's also really important. And I know when they'll say to me, no, that's it, I'm done, then I know that they don't want to go any further, and maybe they will on another occasion. But yeah, I think you get a sense if someone's holding back, and you get a sense if there's a lot that's not being said, which is equally as powerful. And so it's again coming back to creating that space, and they'll open up when they feel ready to.
Yeah, because that space becomes so important. If somebody's holding back, there is the question to ask oneself as the coach as to what's happening in the environment that might be causing that, or might be not causing it, but might be aiding a holding back. Because it might be they're not ready to say that to you. It might be they don't feel safe in the space, that they won't be overheard, or that time's running out and they don't want to go there, knowing that they're going to sort of open a Pandora's box, as it were. So there's something interesting about, if a client's holding back, don't just assume that you need to pry to get them to open up, but also to think about what else might be happening here that's causing that, or part of that I can also pay attention to.
Yes, and I think, I see it. I see it quite often, and I sometimes see towards the end of the session that little nugget of what they were perhaps holding back on. And in slightly, in a way, frustrating. You think, oh no, we're coming to the end of our session and I'd love to carry on. But the fact that they've opened up just enough of that little nugget, they will then go on, because as you know, in between coaching sessions is also when the magic happens as well for people. And so if they have left a session even touching on something, you can guarantee they're going to think about it between that session and perhaps the next session. So I feel it still had a really powerful effect or a really powerful impact. And if they don't, then if you've created the space, they will come back and maybe open it up to you, or when they're ready, or not. But I think it's sometimes the magic happens in between the sessions, which is as powerful.
Yeah, I remember when I first started coaching that I found that almost bizarre, but also slightly frustrating, that we'd be working on something we hadn't quite cracked it or found our way through. And I'd be sort of excited for the next session, right? We're going to get back into that stuff. And you'd begin the session and you'd kind of go, okay, so we were looking at this, we were looking at that. What would you like to look at today? And they go, oh, no, that's done, dealt with. And you're like, but I didn't get to see it. I didn't get to witness it. And it took me a while to really sit with this idea that we sort of begin thinking as well in those sessions that continues after the session. Mm-hmm. And so we don't always get to see the shifts and the changes, but we can know that they're happening because we enable that space to be held for the original thinking to take place.
Yeah. And actually what you've just said there is quite interesting, because as a time to think coach, one of the things that we don't do is revisit what's been discussed before, unless they want to, but it's not my place to do it. So I don't take notes because it's not for me to go back over their stuff, it's their stuff. And so while I'm always excited to hear how they've got on, I can't ask that unless they've given me permission, because I'm then trampling on their thoughts or their thinking or what they've achieved. And I would say it's frustrating, but invariably they share it with me and I find out what's happened, and it's lovely. But it's really important, particularly one of the sort of practices of a time to think coach is knowing it's not our place to go back over what somebody's shared or thought about, unless they give permission to, or unless they volunteer it. Because it also, you're right, you could, I've been tempted to bring something up, and I have made that mistake, because of course I have. And they've said, oh, I've done that, forgotten about that. That was old history. And I'm still on that page thinking, oh, okay, right, better turn over then. And so it reminds me, it's not my place to go back over that.
Yeah. And it sort of speaks a little bit to the, us as the coach, or I'll own it, me as the coach, being a little attached to that thing, and therefore having a desire to revisit and explore, as opposed to being unattached to it and it existing if the coachee chooses it to exist. But if they've moved on, they've moved on, unless of course we're working in an accountability fashion, because then that's part of the work. So this also makes me think about how important it is to be really clear. How are we working? What is our relationship? So I can honor it in how I show up for you as the coach, and you as the coachee.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so and you're absolutely right again there, Robert. And I think for me, I know when people come back to have a session with me, that they come back because they want that space to clear their mind. And as I said, that I have a few clients that have it's accountability, but more often than not, it is that time to think, and they know that's their space, and they can use that time to whatever it is, have a brain dump. And that's what's so special. But what I'm also very good at doing is, at the end of that session, is I may make a note and I'll have a few minutes of reflection, but I then close that book and then stop thinking about it. Otherwise, I would be consumed by all of my clients, and I'll want to know all of their success stories or what's going on. And I don't. I put it away and then wait until I see them again, and then see what's happened and what magic's happened or what need they might have.
And I think that's a really valuable practice for coaches, because we can sometimes allow ourselves to get I was going to say consumed. I'm not sure consumed is quite the word, but we can stay connected to those sessions outside of those sessions. And of course, the more clients you have, the more things you're then connected to, and one can lose one's own self and identity in that, as opposed to going, well, that's closed, that chapter's over, let's close that and we'll reopen it on a fresh page in our next session and see where they are now, as opposed to thinking about it, mulling it over and trying to work out what we might do next. I guess that sort of reminds me of me being over attached to or falling into my rescuer and going, right, how can I think of a great question that's going to help them solve that, but from a rescuer perspective, as opposed to just an unattached coach perspective.
And I would say we're probably all guilty of that. I certainly am, or certainly have been. I'm far more mindful of it now. But again, I think that comes with time and experience. And I could honestly worry about some of my clients and have sleepless nights wanting to save their lives, change their worlds and do everything. But I've learned that it's their responsibility. I can't take responsibility for their lives. And I know that they have absolute 100% of my attention. They get a great value when they're with me, and I then have to close that book and leave it and wait until I see them again. And so I have learnt to not carry that and not sort of want to phone them up and say, did you do this, or has this happened? But I did. And I think as coaches, we all care, we want to know how our clients are, but you can't possibly carry that of it, particularly of every client. If you've got a lot of clients, I think you drive yourself mad.
And I guess this is where supervision plays such an important part, to help us close those chapters and close those loops, and to check in, whose stuff is that? Is that my stuff that's happening there that I need to move on from? Or do I have a concern here that needs to be unpicked because there's something else that needs to be explored or presented with the coachee or the client, whatever that might be, whether I'm noticing trauma then, and as a coach I'm going, oh, I can feel something there that isn't quite right for me to explore. And in supervision we can kind of think that through. But I guess, or not guess, but I know there must be time to think supervision as well.
There is, but equally I do have a coach supervisor as well, and I do have a coach supervisor in as a time to think. But actually just having a coach supervisor helps on every level. And I also myself have a time to think coach. We work with each other every week. We have a session every week. It's part of, if you want to be part of the time to think collegiate, you have to have your own ongoing sessions. So I have a session every week, and at the end of that we do a two-way, and at the end of that we also revisit or go over any possible challenges we may have had. But quite often we work it out, because I might save that challenge, and then when I'm given that space I might work it out afterwards. And when I talk it out loud, again, this is why it's so powerful, when you do talk something out loud, you hear it differently. And then you think, oh yes, now I've said that, oh yes, that makes sense. So I feel lucky enough to have that. And then with more, I would guess, with my transformational life coaching, I have a coach supervisor that I would bring that to, and I have group coach supervision that's massively beneficial. So for any coaches, I strongly suggest you have a coach supervisor, because it so helps you as a coach and separate whether it's coming from you or what your needs are, and whether you're taking on stuff that you shouldn't be taking on. And I think it's just so valuable.
Yeah. And as you were talking about saying out loud, again, it reminded me of sort of the narrative coaching, because we talk about externalizing the story and getting it out of our heads and into the space, because then you can actually see it, you can hear it, you can look at it, and almost it becomes tangible. Whereas when it's just in your head rattling around, we're going over the same pathways with it, and we're not able to be objective with it and see it for what it is.
It is, you're right, it's so powerful, because you say things out loud and you hear them differently, and then it's gone, like you say, it's gone out of your mind. And I think it is so powerful, because I've done that. I've had stuff going on in my head and I've tormented myself for days with it. And then I have a session with my time to think coach, and it's all sorted in an hour. And I think, gosh, I've wasted a week. I could have just done this in an hour. But I think we're all guilty of that. And until you perhaps recognize the value of saying things out loud, you don't really appreciate how powerful that can be to you.
So I'm just loving our conversation here, and I'm aware that you're doing some work with us at Animas, creating some thinking environments for coaches to begin to explore and look at this work, experience this work. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Mm-hmm, sure. Well, I think Nancy Kline, who obviously is the author of Time to Think, she's always been a coach favorite. Not everybody's, but I would say a huge percentage of people. And learning about giving that space to people is just a really powerful addition to your coaching. And so having a day, what we do is really explore what it means. And we go through the 10 components in a much deeper dive to really give people an understanding as to why they're so important to have in place. And in the masterclass, we then there's a practice, each way practice. There's a couple of exercises that we do to really focus on a couple of the components. And it just really helps bring it to life. And I can share stories and we talk about experiences so that people really have a great understanding of what a thinking environment is, what the components mean, and how it can be used in not just coaching, but in everyday life, in every aspect of your life. So I think it's a really great addition to any coaching practice and to any coach and to, frankly, anybody, to be perfectly honest. But it's a really great day and very interactive. And as I said, coaches get a chance to experience that thinking environment for themselves as well.
So if anybody's sort of interested in that program, they can check out the Animas website under the events section, and you can see the time and dates and all the information you need about that. But if somebody's interested in working with you, Lucy, if you could share your contact details or your website, that'd be great.
Sure, it's just lucygourlay.com. That's it. Nice and easy.
Simple as that.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, Lucy, it's been a real pleasure having this conversation with you. And I'm sort of noticing my own frustrations that I've had with coaches where they've asked questions and I haven't been finished yet. And it's just kind of making me go, oh, I need to say to my coaches, wait, just stop a second. Let me get to the end of this or the end of my thinking. Because, it's a shared space. It's not just the coach doesn't own it, nor does the coachee. We own that space so we can create it how we want it to be. So it's just kind of reinvigorated me to think about what's the space that I want as the coachee when I have my own coaching sessions.
No, well, it always reinforces it for me too. I'm not perfect. I interrupt. I can be terrible. I can do all of those things, but essentially I'm very aware of what it means. And so, but I really notice when people interrupt me, I find it very frustrating. So
I hope I haven't interrupted you too much. It's been a real pleasure sharing the space with you, Lucy. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure, Robert. Thank you.